This is the drum, and of course the brakes are inside there, and that's where we need to get into. In order to take this whole unit off, we need to take the axle out. We got to take these bolts off first. These Dodge Danas have these little insert eyelets around each bolt, so you got to kind of tap them out. Sometimes they come easy, sometimes they don't. And these do eventually start to come off, and usually what it takes is just a bigger hammer. You get rid of that one, and you get this one. Okay. Bigger hammer. Have a little drip pan ready when you get those bolts off, because there's oil inside there all the way from the differential that'll drip down once you crack it open. There's two nuts. The first one is held on by a star washer that has a bent tab, and I'm going to use my specialized tab unbender tool to get it out of the way. Once that's out of the way, you sometimes can take this off. It's only finger tight. If not, just use your specialized tab bending tool again to get it started. There we go. So nothing's really torqued down. Those bearings are kind of floating around in there. And then this washer should just pop out of here. There we go. And then there's another nut. And sometimes that's just, yeah, that's just finger tight. Just backed off that outer bearing. There we go. Now the seal wraps around a polished part of the axle, and if you were trying to save that seal, you would want to be very careful how you pull this off, because you don't want to score the seal. But I've got a new seal, so I'm not that worried about it. And the outer bearing is just sitting in here with grease basically right now. This should pull right out. This is the inside of the drum, and that seal I was telling you about is right here, and that looks like it was leaking a little bit. This of course spilled out when I took the drum off, but it wasn't leaking bad, but it looks like it was seeping a little bit. None of this is an emergency failure point. It's not like it's going to leave me stranded on the side of the road, but I like things tight, and it's easy work. I'm glad to be getting in here and just taking care of this stuff. It'll be good for another 30 years when I'm done. Since I'm taking that brake cylinder off, I'll soak it down with a little penetrating oil. Let it sit overnight if I can. I'm going to get my wire brush on the angle grinder and clean up the drum as well. I'll paint that, and I need to take out that bearing inside of there. And there's a special tool. It's pretty expensive. It's around $100 that you can get to pull the seal and pull bearings. But I'll show you what I use. I have a special tool as well. This is my universal special tool. I use it to remove and fix almost everything that I'm having problems with. And I just use a piece of wood. You don't want to use metal because you don't want to score anything up. Stick it in there on that bearing. There you go. Special tool removal. So there's the seal. They recommend that you change whenever you take this out. I knew mine was leaking a little bit, so I had to take care of that. This is the bearing, the inner bearing, and there's nothing wrong with that bearing, and that I can tell anyway. But I'm going to change it. If you were changing the brakes, you wouldn't have to do this. I'm just kind of bent like that. If I'm in here, I'm just going to put a new one in. So I'll get this cleaned up, painted up, and put the new seal and bearing in. Whenever I'm doing a job like this, unless it's some emergency that I got to get it done right away, I'll always take the time to clean everything up and then throw some more paint on it if necessary. And that's really the secret to keeping anything for any length of time. And I'll do that first so the paint can dry properly before I start changing any parts. So I greased up the hub, I greased up the bearing, so I greased up the seal, put the new one in, and you need a special tool again. A lot of special tools for this project. They sell a really kind of expensive seal press to put these in. I'm going to use a special tool of my own. It's a scrap piece of 4-inch exhaust pipe, a piece of 2x4, and a hammer. Just go slow at first to fit it, get it started. There's a lip inside that'll stop the seal from going too far. You'll know when you hit it. And the bearing just kind of sits in there. It will have some movement, maybe 1/8 of an inch. Floats around inside of there. This was the only part of this job that had me slightly worried until I got here. It ended up being pretty easy. But it's that fitting that goes into the brake cylinder from the back of the drums. That can be a bear sometimes. You know, this has been in here for who knows how long. It could be the first time it's been cracked open, and if that's corroded or if you strip it out, it's just a disaster. So, but these both came out pretty easy. First thing I'll do is take this bottom tensioner off. Just get some slack. Just take that out of there. Just remember how you did it. That's loose, and then I'll turn this all the way down so it gives me as much slack as possible to take those shoes off. Once I get it dialed down, I can usually spread it out enough to get it out of there. I'll take these two side springs off just by turning them. That usually works. That usually gives me enough slack to take this bottom spring off. There. Now I only take off what I need to, so I don't bother this front arm. I'm going to change these hooks out, but if you weren't, if you didn't get the kit, you don't have to take those off. And I'm just going to fit the new brakes in behind there, but I'm going to take that cylinder out right now. There's two bolts that hold the brake cylinder in. Usually got to give it a good, there it goes. Maybe it was leaking a little bit. So I clean these two rods up with the wire wheel, and then put them back into the new cylinder with a little bit of grease. And now I'll just fit this up in here and tighten her down. I think it's easier to fit the brake line first and then put the two bolts in to attach the brake cylinder, because this can be a little tricky. You got to move the cylinder around a little bit to get it to start the threads. Then tighten everything up. Before I put the shoes on, anywhere I see that the shoes touch the back plate, I'll try to clean up. And then I'll put a little bit of grease on it. You don't need a lot. I bought a new spring kit for the brakes just to replace all of these. I hook this spring up first because this side will hold itself on with this arm, and then I'll do the other side. These springs sometimes can be a bear. They make special tools for these two, but you know how I am with that. I'll put this back in. That's set in its cradle. This bottom spring goes on. Put this hanger spring on. Get this straight. It goes on. It goes behind here. And then that clips up. That's it. There we go. So it's actually the next day. After I finished putting the brakes on, I took the time to paint up the springs and the inside of the wheel well. I wanted to make sure the rims are thoroughly dry and the paint on the drum is dry. So I put a nice coating of grease on the spindle, and the only thing you can really mess up here is you can score that nice new seal that you put on if you gouge it into the end here. So we want to avoid that. I'm going to try to give you a nice clear shot of my ass while I'm putting this on. There we go. Before I put the bearing in and seal this up, I'm going to flood this reservoir with gear oil. Put that new bearing in, and I'm going to put the nut on, and that's just finger tight. And once you get it tight, you know, spin it around. Once that nut is tight up against that bearing, back it off just a little bit, just like that. And there should be some give. You should be able to hear it like that. Now, the star washer, I would usually use the same tab, but it broke right there, so I'm going to break the rest of it off and use another tab. And then grease up the last nut. Put that on. Now that can be somewhat tight. I just finger tighten it and then give it the old screwdriver nudge. And then I'll bend one of those tabs back. So I just got a screwdriver in there and bent that tab in. So it locks that in. I still got some float room. I can still hear that it can move just a little bit. Not a lot, just a little bit. So I put a thin coat of RTV material on the gasket. I'll put that on. I was also very careful to clean both surfaces of where the gasket will be touching. Make sure they're dry. And I fit this in. Then I'll put all this crap back on. And I'm going to torque it down. Throw some paint on those bolts. So I had one of the kids help me bleed the brakes. Then I'll jack it up about an inch where the tires are free, putting the transmission in neutral. And I'll make my final adjustment. I don't want the brakes to, of course, grab. I just want them to drag a little bit. This is getting pretty close. That's good right there. Don't forget your plug. Wraps that job up. I do have the front pads I'm going to throw on as well, just to get that fresh brake feeling all around. And that's pretty much the major mechanics for the year. That's the jobs I had lined up. The rest of it's going to be just goof around aesthetic stuff. I'm going to put a new floor in, and I've got some lights I want to put on, do some caulking. What do you think, Yank? You ready to go camping? You ready to go camping?